So, we've just heard from two
filmmakers. Really, you got to follow the film.
Let's talk about cheese.
I'd like to talk
is
about
basically
cheese.
what I want.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you, man.
Media math. Let's go into that.
You're welcome. Yeah, let's talk about spreadsheets, guys. So, what do you think? Is this an issue for you? Is it harder to capture consumers' attention today than it was? How do you guys look at this problem of getting brands to be the experience itself and not an interruption thereof? Anyone? Someone?
One of the things I like about this attention idea is that I think it gets back to something so basic, and it's about humanity. And even though we're caught in a lot of this technology, Matt and I were talking this morning about a guy that we used to work with /for, who, when he would, you know this, you know when people do this, they come and shake your hand and they're looking over your shoulder to see if there's anybody else in the room that's a lot more interesting than you. And it makes you feel like a little, turd brooch on somebody's prom dress. However, on the other hand, somebody like Nina DeSessa, if you've ever met her, used to be at McCann, when she was with you, you were the only person in the room, and it made you feel so good. And I love this idea, because it's the same thing in marketing, of either I'm going to feel like a turd brooch or I'm the only one in the room. And the idea of attention is about reciprocity. I'll give you attention and give it back, as opposed to the idea of a day in the life. I'm going to figure out where you are at 2. We'll have the billboard there, don't worry. And I'm going to stalk you out to see if I can run into you during your day. So I like the conversation about attention.
Yeah, actually, I love what Peter and Brett were saying about moving from attention to intention.
Yeah.
I mean, when I think about our brands, I'm really thinking about how can I get the ideas into long-term memory,
right,
and ultimately into consciousness.
You want to stay in the hippocampus.
There you go.
We learned that.
There you go. I mean, I think that's the ultimate goal. But the question is, how do you do it, and what do you do? And on the what side of it, to me, it really is about creating meaning. And that's a very different way of approaching it. I mean, normally we think about reach, in traditional terms, reach and relevancy, and now about engagement. But how do you create meaning, so that consumers actually feel like it's part of their lives? I think part of it is through creating experiences. I think part of it is trying to move beyond this initial engagement of exactly, let me disrupt what you're doing to how can I add value to your life. And that to me that's when you bring humanity back into marketing. And I think the disconnect happened really in the modern marketing approach, which has become much more scientific and much more rooted in pure analysis. But if you can get back to making the human connection, I think you'll start to see interesting things. The other side of it is how do you do it, I think. And the how part is much more complicated, but I think there's several things that are really interesting that are happening. One, the consumer is the medium. And when you look at the consumer as the medium, all sorts of interesting things pop up. When Brett was saying it used to be word of mouth, it kind of still is word of mouth. It just happens in a very different way and in a compressed time. I think it's all about that. Even purchases today, 2/3 of them happen through word of mouth.
Yeah.
So the consumer is medium, and then how do you make your brand a deeper part of culture? And I think we're as guilty as anyone else as being more of a sponsor than a creator. And I think more brands have to move from being observers and sponsors to curators and creators
so
within
it's like
culture.
Prop to character, as I think Brett was saying. Like your brand can either be a prop in a movie or it can be a character, like a real part of it.
I think it's got to be a character in the movie, or the brand itself has to start creating cultural capital. It has to become much more part of the creation process. And I think this division between what we consider commercial versus other forms of story has to dissolve. If it doesn't, people say, okay, that's a commercial. I'm not really interested. Why would I be interested in that? I'm interested in stories that add value to my life. And crossing that line means there's a different type of creativity that has to apply. You're competing with Spider-Man or Batman or Rush Hour. You're competing with all those things because those stories that are meaningful to people. And if you can't get it to that level, then you're wasting people's time.
Okay. That's really true. So Sean and Quentin, you guys, between the two of you, I think, buy every dollar of the $24 billion in online advertising. You have a tremendous, economic responsibility for a lot of, Fortune 100 clients. Yeah, and some of them are on stage. So behave. How do you guys look at it? I mean, you're handed this tremendous sum of money. You're trusted as an advisor and an investor. There's an expected return. How do you guys look at this? Because the problem has obviously become much more complex, even over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, one element I'd like to add to the conversation here is on, and just a little bit what Frank said on adding value, is on incorporating functionality into the brand message. So, I mean, I think if there's one thing that I want to accomplish by the end of my career is to see advertising become more helpful and more of an asset that people actually look forward to, or maybe even consider as content. Sounds a little cheesy, I understand, but if you can truly start to incorporate, what a brand or a company or a service is trying to convey or produce into the experience of content, I think we've got the win-win versus this interruptive.
That's a really good point. So the brand is solution instead of problem or thing to be evaded.
Exactly. And, Quentin and I could sit here and talk to you all day about our, media math and analysis and tools and metrics. No, I will not. Not after the rock stars just got off the stage. Boring guy with a tie up here. But, I think that what drives our investment is in telling that story and being relevant and functional and engaging that consumer. And then the metrics start to flow from there. In this real-time environment, you do know very quickly whether you've captured their attention, whether it's been relevant and successful.
Quentin, do you have a perspective? I mean, I know you work for a lot of empirical clients as well. I mean,
well, look, a lot of marketers face challenges in terms of short-term results versus long-term brand equity. In some categories, it's a little bit more pronounced. But at the end of the day, it's still exceptionally hard to spend a lot of money efficiently and effective online. It just is really, really hard. It takes a lot. I
can make that so much easier for you. Just have an idea.
It takes there's fundamental challenges with the economic model and how you buy, because not all inventory, not all experiences are the same. Yet we still live in this Byzantine, antiquated quill and ink model where we charge things by the tonnage. Yeah. It just doesn't make sense. And it becomes very, very hard, to go to a client and say, how do we think about solving spending money for you wisely online? We had the discussion early on. And I think there's essentially 3 different prevailing models that will evolve over time and really, polarize the way we think about not just the channels that you spend in money, but the types of transactions that drive those negotiations. The first is, what we all know is the face-to-face negotiation, integrated content and brand. And we know how labor-intensive those elements are, but we know when we play to our best strengths, there's tremendous value there for both sides. When it comes to experiences, we can't trade in the same currencies that what we trade in that. So, as an industry, we're ill-prepared to answer simple questions that that our clients ask us. What is the value of an experience of a consumer with my brand in this kind of location? And you've got this disproportionate, setup where clients spend, money in the top 100 websites where attention is probably most fleeting. And then when you look further down in the long tail, you have very engaged audiences, very passionate folks around particular points of interest, and they go to it to honestly waste time. And guess what? They're more open to certain marketing messages. What happens? The CPMs you pay for those kinds of sites is a fraction of what you pay for the premium sites.
You just stated our business model. Yes. No, you're right. And you know what's stunning to me? I mean, putting the old agency hat on, I'm shocked that we still don't have a way to value experiences. Like just like you're saying, okay, somebody spends, 10 minutes with Pepsi World. What does that mean? Economically, what does that mean? Right. You know what I mean? Because we have a way to roughly, even if the math is specious, we have a way to measure, a return on GRPs or things like that. We have no model there. Is that something that you look for, something that you think about?
Well, we've spent a lot of time talking to people about why do you like the experience? I mean, why? And interestingly, they will tell you that they will, because we ask the question, does it need to all be entertainment? And they're so helpful. They're like, no, but I want 80% entertainment And the 20% sell, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes we don't handle the entertainment part right. It's like, isn't that funny? And it really isn't very funny at all. So, I was telling, we have this new policy, OTJC. Oh, that's just crap. Come on, let's move on to the good stuff.
My new favorite acronym.
But that's our challenge, to make sure that we're buying the best stuff. But I think in addition, when you ask them why, and there is this idea of what I pass on and what I tell somebody else is the measure of my status. And so if you can create something that has enough that I want to tell somebody about, that is a good benchmark for us to start internally to talk to our marketers about. Would you tell anybody? Does it have enough value? So I think we're trying to get at, I don't know how to measure it, but I think we're trying to get at how do you get over the bar?
And what, I mean, and this is really for anybody, but what has been the change in your organizations over the last 5-10 years? I mean, we really have gone from this dependable interruptive model to a very different free-falling world. How have you guys changed? I mean, what are some of the ways that you handle the brands differently, you go to market differently? Can you just talk a little bit about how that approach has changed?
Yeah, well, for us, it's evolving. You know?
Yeah.
And you know, I think the first phase of it was just shifting money into a different space,
which
right?
we appreciate.
So,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And which is helpful, but it doesn't get you all the way there. Second phase of it was developing kind of an ancillary experience in the digital space.
Yeah.
And again, you still couldn't tie things together. We're now really focused on what's the big idea, what's the experience we're trying to create, and then how does that come to life in any form. And the difficulty, though, is that while I think a lot of companies are facing this, while you have that philosophy or that conceptual framework, you're still dealing with an industrialized marketing model.
Yep.
You know, it's really a relic of the 20th century. It's an assembly line approach where things are separated. And so, you know, one department develops something, an idea, and then you have an agency that handles this piece of it, and then you have a cross-functional department within the company that handles another piece of it.
Yeah.
And you try to put all this together, and it comes out, was that OTJC? You know, you hit that more often than not, and that's really the core problem. Where it works is when you have a cross-functional team from the very beginning.
Yeah.
That sits down and you sit down as strategic partners and you say, here's what we're trying to solve. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's an experience we're trying to create. Then it works. And we did something called Democracy, where we on Mountain Dew, where we actually created this kind of story-based innovation. And through the story, people actually created the next Mountain Dew product. But we sat down from the very beginning with all the agencies, with all the creatives, you know, all the strategic partners, and it worked seamlessly. And it ended up being our largest limited time offering ever in Pepsi history. But and you won't hit that every time, but you'll at least have a cohesive thought that goes through all the platforms.
That's really cool. Now, you guys, I mean, we grew up together, a lot of us, but media has suddenly been vaulted to the head of the class in that collaborative group that Frank's talking about.
Right.
What's changed there? Like, you're no longer the last 5 minutes of the presentation, the new business pitch or whatever that gets cut.
With the one logo.
Yeah, and a spreadsheet that nobody can read. You guys are ahead of the class.
Yeah.
What's different?
You know, I think that what's different, and I've seen this evolution over the past 5 to 7 years, is that we've taken a much more insightful and creative look into the consumer themselves in many different formats. I mean, I think we used to break it up in audiences into, you know, that archaic adults 18 to 49 that live in a particular zip code and household income, blah. You know, now it's more of a vertical, you know, with their passions and understanding their, you know, their actions and their behaviors. And, you know, we've created a series of human experience centers around the world that tackle a lot of these subjects. And so it's much more, it's less about the demography and much more about these people and their personalities and you know, what drives them and how that can apply to the business objectives that we're trying to drive for our brands. And I think back to your question, just you're starting to see a transformation of the individual, just generally, not just in media, but whether it's in client-side publisher, agency within creative media, the rise of a different type of expert and professional that can manage art and science, manage the analytics, and then convert that into an idea, into a story. That seems to be the change that I've seen.
That's interesting.
I think that to create the richness of the types of experiences that we spoke about requires a very, very broad set of creative partners. We see many of our clients expanding their roster to get to the specialists that can create big branded campaigns, big ideas, but then also folks that know the craft of building a compelling website or a widget or whatever it might be. And so what they then require is a media partner that can really look at the investment, the single biggest line in the OpEx that the CFO cares about. If I put $1 into marketing, what am I going to get back? And this is not taking a short-term perspective versus a long-term perspective, but I think the modern media agency is really the investment partner or investment management partner that says, how do these creative assets perform over time? How do they, where's the portfolio manager that says, if this is a creative asset that performs better than this one, irrespective of the channel, how can we move that around? And then how can you sequence that? Because consumers don't, experience this in the abstract. There's a sequence in which, we have to fit in their life cycle and their purchase cycle. And how can we optimize and use data and use relevance to really make marketing an effective vehicle?
So what results are clients asking you for? I mean, is there one tally sheet at the end that they're all asking for? Is it all over the map? What they hand you however many $1 billion in aggregate every year.
Yeah. So here's the challenge.
What's the report card that you give back?
So we have, as an industry, trained our clients to not measure results.
Good
but
job.
Measure performance. Right? Here we are, we talk about ROI and return on marketing investment and sales, and we come back with, CPM, reach, frequency. I mean, there is, in some instances, no correlation between those things. And I think some of the smarter agencies, certainly the two on the panel here,
obviously,
are figuring out the proxy metrics that show you if we do, look at the trends over time with some of the activity-based measurements. What does that correlate in terms of results? Because ultimately, that's what matters.
I think we're just as trapped by it because if you live and die by numbers only, we'll never get anywhere.
Right.
And so, I know it's sounding sneaky, don't tell anybody at home, but some of the stuff we're doing is the P word. It's a pilot. It's a pilot. Don't worry, nobody's looking at you. We're just going to take a run at it. The idea that fast can be beautiful, because where I come from, we like to sit an egg a long time. So if we can get it out the door better, because fewer people touch it. And then, and my media guy Mark's here, we are a partner. And we're doing pilots with Naked to get our people around the table at one time. There's a lot of midwifing going on with this, but using the P, it's a pilot, so it's okay. To try to remove this fear of I'm not going to perform, as opposed to I'm going to learn something and make it go faster. Fortunately, we work for somebody who's really supportive of that and helps us through the corporation to get that. But unless we get a little freedom here in trying things and always not looking at this at the end of the day, how about this, then that's what we need to do inside to be good partners with our companies.
I think it's also not just about the vacuum of digital as well. It's also how looking at a single consumer, stop treating them in silos. Based on everything from planning down to negotiation, as we all your metrics on the multitasking and everything. It's more appropriate for us as agencies and marketers to certainly weave a message through analog and digital, and then also see how everything from TV to search, how that is starting to lift whatever brand measures you're going into to track.
From a client side, I mean, my first request is just decipher it for me, because I mean half of the time it's like hieroglyphics. You know, what I mean,
Yeah.
it's like it's these spreadsheets with numbers that are in rows and columns. That by the time your eyes glaze over and they look at you, everyone's nodding, but no one really understands.
I think we count on
You know
that.
what I mean?
Yeah.
I bet. But I think part of it, though, why it continues, it's that whole notion of what I said earlier about the industrialized marketing model. And if people have a certain comfort, even if they know the metrics are wrong.
That's a lie we can all agree
to.
to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the CFO still believes that metric is okay.
Yeah.
People are I'll use that metric, and say, hey, the CRM or GRP or whatever it is. And you're like, I know it's not true. I know it doesn't really measure anything meaningful, but that's what everyone is using right now as a proxy for what they think success is like. And I think we're now at a point where that's no longer sustainable.
Well,
that has to go.
And that's our point, is like, when you think about CPM, the only onus that you're asking the media company to adopt is that they delivered your ad.
Yeah.
Well, good job. I mean, I would hope you would deliver my ad. You know what I mean? Like, but what happened then is the real question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you get into some territories where it is difficult. I gotta say, I mean, like, how do you measure an experience? It's a difficult thing. Yeah. You can't. There's nothing out there, nothing, that measures consciousness. Nothing. Neuroscience is great. I love neuroscience. But it can't measure consciousness. It can't measure awareness. It can't measure intention.
Yeah.
It can measure the emotional effect. It can measure craving. It can measure a bunch of different things, but it can't measure consciousness. So the question really is, what's the next proxy that gets you close enough that gives everyone comfort that this is delivering something of value for the brand?
And what do the CFOs of your companies ask for? Like, when they say, okay, this ginormous line item,
yeah.
What should obviously sales volume, contribution and things like that, but like, what are the
It begins and ends there. I'll be honest with you.
Okay.
I think now.
Yeah,
it used to be, okay, if you show me awareness and you show me relevancy, I'll play along with you that eventually that's going to lead to sales.
Right.
Eventually. But now most CFOs that I've seen in all the divisions are saying, I want more comfort that there's a direct tie between what you're doing and actually ultimately driving sales.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, at least show me that you're ultimately building brand equity. But all these terms are loose terms right now.
Right. What does brand equity mean?
Exactly
Exactly.
right. And so I think we're all in the process. I mean, every large company that I know of is struggling with how do you define these terms today so that they're meaningful both to the CFO but also to the brand marketer.
And on the agency side, obviously, you have clients under pressure more than ever before. They're asking for proof, for decipherable proof. How do you guys approach that? I mean, P&G, one of the most successful, empirical-based marketers. How do you attack that problem with them? Not P&G in particular, but just in general.
There's a variety of metrics. There's a little bit to this story, but I'll give you the direct answer. But then what's going on in the background is also a little bit of a transformation, some transition, and just comfortability over time. Just because human behavior always has to play a role in this on new ways to count media, that we actually will. There was pretty strong efforts to convert to a single GRP for cross media, and that very well still may be the case in certain responses. There's also an equal respect to paying attention to all the many different dimensions of counting media, and then assessing some sort of price value to each, in terms of impression and interaction rate, and certainly click, and then lead sales and CRM elements, and starting to do those. So there's an education. There's a real rise of within the agency world of the business intelligence centers and units.
Yeah.
These are separate people. These aren't the the media planners and buyers taking on a part-time job. These are the hardcore analysts that have set up systems to get immediate responses to campaign information. Having a lot of those systems dial into our clients' sales systems and start to get a better sense of consumers and their actual purchasing habits, et cetera. So there's a lot to it. There's a huge volume.
Yeah.
And what we're doing increasingly is just in educating our clients to be more comfortable about the many different ways to count a consumer and how they act.
So do all these, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and there's this just absolute flow of different touch points right now. Is there a standard measure? Is time something that you look at as a standard contribution measure from TV to promotions to viral to whatever? Is that not something you, is there a standard metric or is there none?
No, there's not. I mean, there certainly are a number of efforts that that the industry bodies are supporting. But I think there are a couple of issues that we have. The first is, we live in this perfect storm that we have marketing as the last shared service to be optimized, and consumers that are seemingly out of control because they don't behave in predictable ways that make it efficient for us to interrupt the great content that our content partners produce. And so how do we use technology to start to understand what role we ought to play in context? I mean, we can have the best possible experience, but if it's out of context and not relevant, it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm the best possible internet consumer out there. I never clear out my cookie pool. Right? But somehow, if you're in the audience, I already have the lowest possible mortgage. Don't give me the banner. I already have the largest possible, penis. and
Congratulations.
And the freaky baby. And the freaky baby on Facebook.
I'm going to have to turn my title over to you, apparently.
But so how do we use data in meaningful ways to create the targetability so that those experiences are relevant, are adoptable, and can ultimately be valuable?
And I thought those messages were especially for me, man. All those pop-ups.
But you know what? You're saying that, and yet that's where most of the money goes, Quentin, is to those broad reach vehicles. Even in our highly accountable brave new world of digital, that's where most of the money goes.
It's easier. It's the
It's
easiest way
easy.
to spend.
Yeah, I mean, to your point of the industrial complex,
That's right.
it's like, that's easy.
Yeah, people want to, brands want to do something on Facebook. They want to do social media, and so what do? We buy fridge magnets on Facebook for you.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
you think
not-
about it, there's a lot of
not
engaging-based media that we don't buy, that captivate in the elevator. We're all staring at because we don't want to talk to each other. Or the in-flight videos where you're paying attention to that, stuff like that where you're actually engaged, and they've had those kind of things are doing better, but they've constantly had a problem just attracting significant ad dollars. Yet they are guaranteed to get your attention, and you're forced to spend time with them, and you want to be there. So there's
a misalignment.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there are two other things. How do we get a better understanding of the experience within each of these contexts, right? For example, Twitter. Everyone knows about Twitter and the followers and celebrity tweeting and all that. It's great. But if you think about Twitter as being the power of now, right? When Google had its blackout, what did it do? If you Google, you get nothing. But if you went on Twitter, there was this long conversation that explained exactly what was happening with the blackout. Same thing in Iran. It's the power of now. Then if you start to think about it that way, and if that's the experience, then you have a better understanding of how to plug into it. I mean, you can go from Facebook to Twitter to any other social media, think about it in that different way, and suddenly new possibilities arise. I think the second one, and this is a challenge that I think Peter brought up earlier, it's the paradox of going small before you go big, right? And our instinct is we have big audiences, big brands, big bases, big budgets. Let's get a big audience right away. And paradoxically, you're better off finding a core group of people who are really excited about what you have to say and hitting them hard, and then letting that spread. That's the better way to do it, but it's not built into this industrialized way of approaching marketing.
Totally.
And so I think that's another leap we have to make.
Because it's still romance at the very end.
It really is,
Yeah.
So Dana, we were talking earlier about sort of the ingredients to a great story and things like that, and you're starting to bring some of that thinking, that storytelling thinking into craft and selling some some brands?
We did two interesting things. We had the photographers and the food editors from Gourmet Magazine, all the lovely food magazines, to come and talk to us about how they do it. And interesting, even though it's a flat picture, there's a story for every photo that they know before they go into the shoot. And we're going, oh, we didn't have a story. We didn't have a story. I had a strategy. And then when I asked my agency guy, what's his story, he says, well, the photographer knows. And so we're trying to make everybody aware of, do you know the story? The other thing, and you can look this up, there's a storyteller teacher named Bill Johnson in Portland, and he's not the only one in Portland. I don't know what it is about the storytellers, but apparently they congregate there. And I'm not kidding. It's really true. And he said there are 3 parts. When he's teaching storytelling, 3 parts. The first one is the purpose. Like Romeo and Juliet, the purpose is the power of love. The middle part is the momentum. How do I get you over the obstacles? And the third part is the audience fulfillment. What do I want the audience to leave? We never think about the audience. I mean, we are now. But I think in general, and when I was on the agency side, you just wanted to get it done and sold. You weren't so much thinking about what's the after effect, because you were already bombarded by the link score and the IAG number, and you know you were going to get chased out of town for that too. So basically, getting through with the idea unscathed was your goal. But to take a moment to stop and say, I'm making this for them, the story's for them, so what's the fulfillment on the other side? It's kind of a real interesting idea.
And the internet does spectacular things in enabling us to not just tell the story, but allow the story to be propagated and deliver value,
and add it on.
Making it useful. You know, it's not just the message, it's utility.
Yeah, and it gets really interesting when the story engine becomes public. You know, suddenly when you used to be the one-way story, but what happens when you make it interactive? What happens when you put it out there and you let people respond to it and shape it and build it? That's when it really gets interesting. I think that's where you're going to see much, hopefully you'll see some of it from us. We'll see if we ever get it out, but I think you're going to see that in the future for sure.
Okay. Well, I wish we had all day, but please help me thank Dana, Sean, Frank, and Quentin.
What you wanted, baby?
That was awesome. Thank you. Just a little more attention. Sit down. Sit down. Not you guys. You guys are fine. Okay. So, thank you for your attention during our attention convention. By now, you may be wondering, that's great, who the hell is Betawave? Exactly. And I'll start by telling you what Betawave is. Betawave is actually a cognitive term. It's a term for the mind state of active concentration. And we, as I said, built a company around the idea that we shouldn't just chase reach, those maximum number of people, but we should chase their attention, the time that they spend. And we, in many ways, obviously have done a terrible job of PR, but we may be the biggest media company you've never heard of. We have the largest youth audience, 6 to 17-year-olds, #1 with moms, 25 to 54, are growing with 18 to 34, and are continuing to age northward as we scale. The way we measure is on our reach times our time spent. Unique users times time spent. And it's to get an aggregate amount of attention that we can then turn around and sell to brands. Skip the impression part of the chain and dive directly into attention, which is ultimately what drives intention. And Peter was talking about this earlier, but we see clearly in our own research and in third-party research, attention is the precursor to intention. Intention is that learned behavior that drives offline sales. If you are a direct marketer, I understand there's a reason for the click-through rates, for the cost per lead, cost per acquisition, et cetera models. If you're a consumer packaged goods and you can't download directly through the internet, it's that intention that needs to be built. and that is what we want to sell. Because of the audiences we have in this highly engaged state, our interaction rates on games, on advertising, tend to be disproportionately high, by a factor of 10 in many cases. And it's simply because we've built our scale, again, on the end product of attention instead of just gross reach. You can see this in the, albeit imperfect, but indicative proxy of click-through rates. You can see it in the qualitative scores from Dynamic Logic and others on the offline sales contribution, the purchase intent. And what we'd like to invite you to do now is to see it through an attention application. What we've done is developed an attention app. And it's tools for you guys to use. It's very beta. I forget Dana's terms, but this is certainly not a finished product. It's a first shot. It's for you. We want to hear what you think of it. We want to hear where else you want to see it go. We want to develop this with you. But the idea behind the Attention app is, hey, let's look at digital media not just as how many people can we reach, but how much attention can we generate for brands. And begin to look, there's a calculator, begin to calculate attention, begin to compare attention between media properties, and then help you through the exercise of capturing attention. And it even cleverly measures your own attention to the app itself, time spent on both a passive and an active basis. So this is our Attention app. We invite you to embrace it and use it. And Mike, you want to switch back there, pal? Mike is having too much fun up there. You do work for me now still. You can't blow me off like the others. So with that, we hope to invite the beginning of a discussion. You've seen the show, install the app, and let's have a conversation about attention. Thank you so much for your attention today.